At long last, we are finally at the end of this look back at the NES's games from 1991. Have no idea what I'm talking about? There are 2 previous episodes in the show notes, and just to save myself some time, all Japanese games on this list do have English fan patches, so I don't have to say that 10 more times, okay? Well, let's begin with Niji no Silkroad, or Rainbow Silkroad, which launched first on February 22nd, 1991 in Japan. This might be one of the weirdest RPGs I've ever encountered on the NES, or anywhere really. It seemingly takes place in a fantastical version of the real world. For example, you visit cities like Damascus and Baghdad, so it's at least in the Middle East. Anyway, there is no leveling up, gear instead boosts stats, which isn't that uncommon for RPGs. Here's the big twist though. Defeating enemies gives you LP, or license points, which lets you buy and sell things better with, well, licenses. Your goal is to get materials in one area and then sell them at a higher price elsewhere in the world. This is all good in theory, but this game has an even higher grind cost than early Dragon Quest games. It is an insane task to get LP, let alone money, in order to fund your adventures. Again, it's interesting, I'll give it that, but I wasn't exactly thrilled while playing it. Radia Senki Remhein, or Chronicle of the Radio War, launched first on November 15th, 1991 in Japan. This is another hidden gem from Tecmo. It's a bit kind of like Final Fantasy Adventure. You go from screen to screen, but unlike that game, which is more like Zelda, battles here are randomized. Your actions are just very similar to the former example. Anyway, the slowness of battle was at first jarring, and monsters really don't pose much threat at first. A lot of them barely even move. Even your AI partner is a little slow-witted. It's a great looking NES game that is a bit archaic in some places, but overall, I still really dug it the more I got into it. Robaco Wars launched first on August 2nd, 1991 in Japan. This is part platform shooter as a robot and part horizontal shooter. See, every level is different than the one before in that this robot changes forms. It begins as a platformer that goes into the air and eventually goes into the sea as well. This constant changing kept things interesting for me, plus the colorful visuals and the weird bosses like a ship that shot high heels at me made this game pretty engaging. The Rocketeer launched first in May 1991 in North America. This is teetering on the edge of rinky-dink license-based games. The Disney film had a great concept for a video game. You're like a 1930s version of Iron Man fighting Nazis. If that doesn't sound like a cool game, then I don't know what does. Unfortunately, this is not the game we're all envisioning in our heads. The graphics are good for a prototype that was never finished, which is to say it could look amazing with a little bit more effort, which is a thought that can be copy and pasted to the rest of the Rocketeer NES game, from level design to gameplay. Flying, by the way, is the game's worst aspect, which, what's even the point to play it then? Rockin' Cats launched first on April 5th, 1991 in Japan, and later that September in North America. This is a pretty decent action platformer with a fun concept, colorful graphics, and some cool mechanics. It comes from a developer that may shock you, Atlas. Yes, this was both published and developed by the company that makes Persona. It's a genre they used to dabble in more on the NES, like the adaptation of Wacky Races, which is also a good NES game. Anyway, you're really out to rescue your girlfriend from a dog mafia. You can select levels from a TV screen along with purchasing new items from shops. Levels all have some kind of theme to them, from a western to the mean streets of New York. For negatives, I will say levels feel a little too long, but again, this is a pretty great platformer. Time Zone launched first on October 25th, 1991 in Japan. This is a game wherein an evil, time-traveling scientist kidnaps your girlfriend, or whatever, and sends you on a rescue mission through time, like to the Jurassic Age, because of course, the 90s were hot for dinosaurs. Anyway, you start in the then modern age of 1991, fighting off armies of bees and sentient pop cans, tires, and stop signs. Oh right, and by collecting bells, you turn into an invincible skateboarder. Needless to say, this game is pretty weird, but actually fun. Controls aren't perfect, but they do the trick. Same goes for the levels. On the plus side, they are quick, which is always nice. On the downside, I'm not much a fan of one-hit kills, but most stages aren't that difficult anyway. Tiny Toon Adventures launched first on December 20th, 1991 in Japan, and sometime in December for North America as well, so let's just go with the Japanese date. Anyway, Konami somehow gained the license to make and or publish the first few Tiny Toon games. like Capcom's work with Disney, they are all pretty decent. This game sounds as good as the show and is a real looker for the NES with almost a crayon-like design to the visuals. It is pretty easy, which may deter some from checking it out. Also, the ability to switch between Buster and a chosen ally via power-ups was a weird decision. Why not just let players swap on the fly? But overall, it's a great game from a great cartoon show from my youth. Treasure Master launched first on December 13th, 1991 in North America. It was created for the sole purpose of promoting a contest in collaboration with MTV. See, the whole point of the game is to get through it as fast as possible to then send in results with unlocked passwords, to then unlock new stages and repeat the process. It was a little complicated and ahead of its time. It's technically an action platformer, but it's more of an adventure game at its core, as you have to find the exact thing to move on, which is done through trial and error and a lot of backtracking. Since you can't win any prizes today, it has no value, although the music is 100 times better than it deserves to be. Also, the walking animation for this 8-bit bro is pretty charming. Everything else just sucks. Vice Project Doom launched first on April 26, 1991 in Japan, and later in November for North America. This game starts off as a little bit of a mislead as a vertical shooter in a car. However, eventually it turns into the main game, a rad action platformer. If you like Shatterhand, a game in which I actually gave a full review to a couple years ago, you'll love this. The enemies are weird demons, but they look more like Halloween dime store monsters. You have a giant sword, the music rocks, it has everything. It's also pretty dang hard when it comes to bosses and checkpoints. But thankfully, this is on the Switch's NES download thing, so it's the most readily available game on this 30-game list. So, no excuses, check it out. And finally, we have YY World 2 SOS Passeri Jo, launching first on January 5th, 1991 in Japan. This is a Konami crossover action platformer. Your main character is Rickle, who looks like a spaceman that can shoot stuff. It's one of those games where the camera moves automatically, which I am never really a fan of unless it's in a space shooter, which coincidentally this game has sections of that. Anyway, the music and chill graphics make it adorable, especially once you see these versions of classic characters like Goemon from his titular series, Bill from Contra, or Simon from Castlevania. These special characters run on time. Get hit, time goes down, otherwise it runs down naturally. Unlike the previous YY World, which is honestly just dreadful by comparison, this is a lot easier. It's almost like Konami course-corrected itself way too much. As bad as the first game is, there are things I like about it that I think would make for an awesome third game if combined with some of these elements as well. Overall, this game in particular is a delight, rambling gripes aside. And that's it for me. Hope you enjoyed the history lesson, and I also hope you found one game, if not several, you'll want to check out. And hey, 1991, despite a lot of dretch that I had to get through, you were a pretty good year for NES games. Did you like that video? If you did, please like, subscribe, and spread the good word of ReActionExaminer. If you want to read more of my stuff, you can find a plethora of my articles over at TheGamer and Game Rant. All of those links and more are in the show notes below. Thanks for watching!